Good morning from snowy central Alabama. If you are listening to us anywhere in the SEC footprint, except for maybe Florida, you're probably waking up to a winter wonderland this morning outside your window. And that's where we are too. But thankfully, we are warm at home right now, and we're ready to discuss some SEC football like we do every Tuesday here on First Down South. I'm joined by my good friends John Talty and Matt Zenitz. And guys,
I give props to Jay Talls. That's the first time I've seen a North Face.
We're all busting out the winter weather gear, man. Yeah.
If North Face wants to sponsor me, I am open to it.
Can respect that.
Yeah.
It goes back to the Baltimore days for me since I saw somebody wearing North Face. So it's almost like a blast from the past.
John Talty on the forefront of the name, image, and likeness movement in college sports.
Hey, North Face, Under Armour got the full
That's right.
Yeah.
We're repping our gear with no compensation this morning because this is a college sports show. So it's been an interesting couple of days. A movement that seemed to swell up out of nowhere finally came to fruition yesterday when Gus Malzahn, former head coach at Auburn, ends up being named the head coach at Central Florida. This is not particularly a move I saw coming. It seems like not a lot of folks around the Auburn program saw this coming. It was I think we had almost reached a foregone conclusion that Gus was going to spend 2021 chilling, relaxing, fishing, eating Taco Bell, doing all the things that we know Gus loves to do. But he ends up having this opportunity comes up and he takes it. So first of all, just before we get into this, John, what do you think about this decision by Gus? I guess not so much in terms of the larger landscape of how it affects college football, but just for Gus and his own personal career. What do you make of this move?
Well, I think you can look at it two different ways. One, I think it's a great landing spot for Gus in the sense that this is probably one of, if not, top 3 or 4 best group of 5 jobs. We've seen, both Scott Frost and Josh Heupel have a lot of success there recently. And from talking to people in the industry, a lot of people wanted this job. It was a very competitive job. I think that there was a very, very strong candidate pool. And I think that shows, again, people thought that they can come in and win right away at this job, which I think that Gus is going to be able to do. I think the downside for me is whether Gus has learned enough from why things didn't work at the end at Auburn to be able to be, the best version of himself at the next job. I know you talked yesterday kind of about, kind of a hard look that he's done over the last 2 months, but I mean, I don't know how much you can necessarily learn in just 2 months. I think that we've seen sometimes in the past, guys jump into a job very fast after getting fired. Everybody's excited about it. Kevin Sumlin, I think, is a good example of this. And that person is not really having success at the next job, I think, in part because they didn't have enough time to really take a step back, talk to different people, really do a thorough evaluation of why things didn't work. And so for me, if there's a concern, it's that Gus Malzahn was known as an innovative offensive mind. If you look at the beginning part of his tenure at Auburn, that's really kind of what they were known for and what they were best at. If you look at the end of his tenure at Auburn, no longer an innovative offense. The game had changed. People had caught up to what they were doing, and they were known much more for what they were doing on defense than offense. My concern would be that he does not figure out what went wrong there, enough to be able to have success at the way he should at UCF.
I do think that's an interesting point, John. But I also think to some degree, because success at a football program, I know everybody likes to make the story, this guy was in charge, they didn't win, so he's the failure. But I do think it's interesting sometimes how complicated all of this can be. And I think a lot of coaches, both of you can attest, would tell you that they don't always have all the resources that they need to be able to be successful. Sometimes they get hampered by other people in their own program, university. And I think there's probably some pretty good evidence that that's how Gus feels. So it will be interesting to see what plays out now that Gus is walking into a program where I don't want to say that Gus Malzahn is bigger than UCF, but he's a bigger fish in a smaller pond now than what he's coming from, a place that has such institutional, power and prestige that there are guys at Auburn that can say, we've been here longer than you. We know what works, and you got to listen to us on this. I don't necessarily know that there will be anybody at UCF that pushes Gus around like that. But Matt, we saw yesterday there were people in Central Florida asking Gus if he was going to be able to handle the pressure cooker of UCF football. What's your feelings, I guess, about how entwined UCF is suddenly becoming in Power 5 football? I mean, they're obviously not part of it yet, but they do seem to be. They seem to consider themselves there.
I'll backtrack just to what you were saying, just in the lead into the first part, where we're led into John's question. And this is something where to people in the football world, and just looking back through even like messages yesterday, I was curious how far back Gus's name had come up. And I went back to January 27th, right when all of this opened up with the UCF deal, where Gus's name had started to be floated out there with people in the football world in terms of being a potential fit at UCF. And obviously there had been names like Jeff Lebby that had gotten a lot of traction during the course of even just the last week. But I can tell you, and John and I had this conversation Thursday, Friday, whatever it was, that had somebody in the football world mention Gus at the very least as somebody to keep an eye on. And it was very clear throughout the course of the process with UCF that they were targeting an offensive-minded guy. So their interviews were not limited to coaches with offensive background, but it was very clear even to candidates who were involved in this that the preference for them was to get an offensive-minded coach. Gus obviously falls into that category. And to me, this is a win-win for both sides. So UCF is the kind of job where not only is it arguably the best group of 5 job in the country, but it's a group of 5 job that's probably better than a lot of Power 5 jobs around the country. And then to go along with that, you're bringing in a coaching Gus who, it'd be hard-pressed to find somebody for school like that is more accomplished coming in, even though there would have arguably been some guys, whether it be Jeff Lebby, somebody else, who arguably could have had maybe more upside, but at the same time would have been a lot more unproven than somebody like Gus.
Yeah, and I do wonder, Matt, what is your impression of where Gus's perception is in the coaching community, in the college athletics community right now? I mean, because I honestly don't really know what I feel about Gus right now. I think there's no question that the trajectory of the program wasn't great in the last year or so. But at the end of the day, I keep trying to come to terms with a couple of facts about Gus. One of which being, this is the last guy to beat Alabama. This is the last guy who was able to put that together. Yeah. And on top of that, I would also say there are really not very many active head coaches in college football that have made an appearance in a national championship game and are still. It's been so concentrated among the top, and Gus is one of those guys. So, what's your feeling about where he's perceived in kind of the pecking order right now?
People haven't forgotten he is the last head coach to beat Nick Saban in Alabama, and obviously, even though there were clearly issues at Auburn during the course of the last few years, Gus had that program consistently at a point where they were competitive within the SEC, and I obviously performed it the absolute worst, or at the very least at an above average level. And once again, this is an accomplished coach who not only has 3 wins over Nick Saban, but obviously has the national championship background to go along with that. I think that UCF is getting a win here. And more importantly, in my opinion, in talking to people in the coaching world yesterday, they feel like this is a win for UCF, and even more so just overall a win-win in this situation. That it's just a great fit overall. That was the consistent feedback that I got yesterday.
Yeah, it's evident they were very excited about the hire at UCF yesterday. I think it's going to depend on how things go on the field, but they've got an opportunity here, I think, to put their program back in the middle of the national conversation the way they were in 2017.
Yeah.
I think Gus has an opportunity as well to make himself a really hot name again in the way that he was, 5 or 6 years ago, coming off of that 2013 season. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I had one more thing in. So it was interesting just because I don't follow UCF on a daily or consistent basis. So it's interesting getting some feedback on them yesterday. And there were some issues with UCF during the course of the last couple of years. So if you look at what they did under Scott Frost, that was the point when they were posting the undefeated season and things along those lines. But if you look at the last couple of years, I think had like 7 losses the last 2 years combined. Something that was consistently referenced were some culture problems under Josh Heupel, especially last season. They lose a good amount of guys off of last year's team, including top players like Aaron Robinson, who Alabama fans probably remember was a part of this program before going to UCF and becoming a standout guy there. So it's not like Gus is walking into a situation where they're coming off an undefeated season. It's going to take some work to get them back to that level, just to be clear.
Right.
But obviously, it's a high upside program that you've seen during the course of these last few years, what they're capable of accomplishing. And it was pretty clear just the respect that people in the coaching world have for this job, this program, based on some of the people that were in the mix and being interviewed for it. So aside from Gus, you had Jeff Lebby, who obviously was a part of one of the top offenses in college football last year at Ole Miss. Phil Longo in North Carolina was another guy who interviewed on Friday. Heard yesterday that Dan Lanning from Georgia, the DC, had interviewed to go along with that. And I'm sure there were at least a couple other guys to go along with that, but some highly respected names, and it shows just the kind of job that this is. Yeah,
well, we will have to see what Gus makes of the job and what he does within the next couple of years. But assuming he's able to make UCF among the best teams in their respective conference and get the program back to where it was under Scott Frost, Gus could very quickly become a hot name again in college football, and a hot name to the point that I wonder if we could be hearing Gus mentioned as that name that everybody's kind of got their eye on in the SEC a couple of years from now. And John, we know the way that the SEC operates. We know that even if everybody's high on you right now, you really never have that long of a leash. So I'm curious, beyond Gus, are there names out there floating around right now that, if you're a coach that's maybe edging towards the hot seat heading into 2021, that those guys make you nervous? You're looking over your shoulder a little bit at them.
Yeah, I think there are 2 obvious ones, and that's Billy Napier, who has seemingly been up for every single SEC job that's opened up over the last few years, and then also Hugh Freeze, who gets mentioned for every SEC job but hasn't really gotten any traction because of his well-known issues. So I think those 2 guys, any single time an SEC job opens up, those 2 guys will get mentioned for it. Napier has obviously had multiple opportunities this past cycle. If a school, say LSU, opens up, could that be the one that gets Napier to finally jump and leave Louisiana? I mean, it's possible. So I think it depends on the opportunity for Napier. He's obviously been very patient and waiting for the right job, so he's not going to jump at just any SEC job. But if one of the bigger ones opens up, maybe that's something that happens. Another name I think to keep an eye on for, you saw his name I think get thrown out for some of these jobs, is West Virginia's Neil Brown. I think Neil has done a pretty good job. I wouldn't say a great job, but a pretty good job at West Virginia. And I think if he can keep elevating them, he has ties. If somebody like Mark Stoops decides to leave Kentucky, Neil Brown would make a lot of sense to slide in there. So he's another one that I think is going to come up. But you'll have even more guys. I think Will Healy, if he has success, he had an unfortunate year, which almost all their games got canceled. But if he has success, I think he'll get mentioned for jobs. Scott Satterfield at Louisville was very much in the mix for that South Carolina job. If things don't go, maybe as playing this year, I could see him look for an exit ramp. So there's multiple names that I think that are going to bubble up, including Gus if he has success in the future. But I think Napier and Freeze are kind of the top two at this point in terms of SEC jobs.
And John, did you get the impression that part of the reason why Napier or Freeze, either one of them, didn't ultimately end up in any of those openings in the SEC this year, was it because they were waiting for a bigger fish? Was it what do you get the impression was down to?
Well, I think it's different things. I mean, I think Napier is a hard one to get a read on. I mean, I think he's just very patient. I think people will tell you to know him that he just kind of cut a different way, and he's willing to wait for what he thinks is the right opportunity. I mean, there are people who believe he might be trying to wait out Alabama, and so I mean that's obviously many years down the line at this point. But he just has not shown a desire to just jump at the first big job that comes open. Freeze is a different situation in that Freeze, I would say, still this past cycle, I don't want to say he was untouchable, but there were issues there. And certainly, and I had written about this, months ago, everybody kind of had him pegged for the Tennessee job if it opened up a year from now. And unfortunately, I think for Freeze, the timing of it just made that impossible. I mean, to fire Jeremy Pruitt and not pay him any money because of recruiting violations, you can't then hire a guy who got an SEC school under trouble for recruiting violations. It just made it impossible. And so he's going to have to wait at least another year. And I know he's told people that, he's patient, he's willing to wait, and he likes the situation at Liberty and all those different things. But I think he would have jumped if he could have gotten Tennessee, and that just was not possible this year.
Yeah, you got to find a program with the right situation, the right environment to take that leap. Matt, I know you're a guy who keeps up a lot with the up and comers in the coaching industry. Are there names to look out for in the SEC who are not currently head coaches somewhere?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, just looking at it in terms of potential SEC head coach openings, I just don't know how many we're going to see this next cycle.
I think we're talking more about kind of like the next couple of years, really, because like you said, there's still going to be a lot of guys entering their first or second year this fall.
Yeah. So you have the top programs, obviously, the Alabamas, the Georgias. You can even throw the A&Ms of the world in there at this point. We're just don't anticipate anything happening there coming up at any point in the near future. And then some of the schools in terms of the middle tier or bottom part of the conference, most of them at this point are with new coaches entering either their first or second year there. So actually I think that these coming cycles, especially this next one, could be relatively quiet in terms of coaching turnover within the SEC. But at the same time, there are up-and-coming assistants within the conference who I think will be in line for head coaching opportunities with jobs outside of the SEC. So throw out one in terms of the UCF situation and Dan Lanning, a guy who is as respected as an assistant coach as anybody in the conference. People in the coaching world that have worked with him absolutely rave about Dan Lanning and his potential for moving forward. Has gotten interest for head coaching jobs in the past, as recently as the UCF deal, where even if he wasn't a person at the top of the list, at the very least had communication there. The Jeff Lebbys of the world, we talked about him with UCF, another up-and-comer. Mike Elko, I know John likes and has talked about before, is another one that seems like he's on a path where could potentially get a head coaching job at some point in the near future. Then I'll throw out an interesting one, Pete Golding at Alabama. So I know has a lot of critics within the Alabama fan base, but I can tell you that there was a lot of buzz in the coaching world. If Billy Napier had left Louisiana, that Pete Golding would have been one of the people at the top of the list for that school in terms of potentially filling that vacancy if that opened up.
Yeah, I mean, look, and Saban has clearly done a lot to keep him around. In addition to the defense, like you said, Matt, the fan base is not going to be appreciative of it because they have memories that are both focus on the one bad thing that they remember from this season, but also they remember 2011, they remember 2016, they remember these elite, destructive Alabama defenses. And it's hard for them to accept, I think, sometimes that the game has changed a little bit. But,
Casey, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
tapping into the Alabama fan side of things, has there ever been a bigger gulf between clearly how Golden is viewed by Saban and internally versus how fans view him? I mean, like, I don't know that. I mean, Doug Nussmeier, I mean, obviously fans didn't like him, but it seemed like Saban ran him out of town. Like, is there anybody even close to, from an assistant standpoint, Alabama-wise, that had such a big difference between Alabama versus Alabama fans?
I think it took some time. I mean, look, the defense was always just sort of it was pretty much always attributed to Saban when it was going well anyway.
Right.
So it's hard to find a defensive equivalent. I do think there are some offenses that the fans weren't on board with the coordinator until the absolute last possible second. And I think that has more to do with that this is a fan base that's now sort of become conditioned, partly by their head coach, to over criticize and analyze everything and not just sort of revel in it. And I think you can go back to 2009. I think 2017 is another really good example of the fans just didn't trust that the offense was going to be good enough to get it done until, I mean, in 2017's case, I think if Tua doesn't make that throw at the end of the 2017 season, the fan base considers that offense a failure for the season. And instead, they won a national championship, and Brian Dable is having a successful career in the NFL now. So, I mean, this is definitely a fan base that does not consider you a success right up until the final whistle of a national championship game.
I just have to throw in, though, and this is going back to the first topic, I'm actually really disappointed with John right now. So John threw out a few interesting big names, but he left out one who could conceivably be in that same conversation in terms of a former SEC head coach, has worked in the SEC during the course of the last couple of years, has a new job now that if he does well could maybe put himself in position to get back to the SEC as a head coach. Do you guys know who
I think we're talking about Mike Locksley.
Incorrect.
No?
No. So somebody who's just a special assistant to the head coach at Alabama. Yeah.
I don't know. I think Butch is.
Look, we'll see. I do think I don't remember who said this, but one of our journalism colleagues yesterday was pointing in the discussion about Tennessee football and where they are, and I think possibly partly the fact that some people felt that UCF possibly has a better head coach than Tennessee has now.
I feel that way for the record.
Somebody brought up the fact that Butch has actually been one of the most successful head coaches that Tennessee has had, arguably since Philip Fulmer, and really one of the main reasons why people don't see that and can't really appreciate that is that Butch was really bad at press conferences.
Butch was incredibly cheesy.
Yeah,
that was his downfall. And I think Butch is I don't pretend to know Butch, but from the people I talk to and everything, people think he's a good guy. I think he's likable. I think he's pretty genuine. Like, he just fell into the trap of being incredibly cheesy with all his slogans. Like, if you just take away Champions of Life and 5-Star Hearts and whatever their weird trash can thing they did, if you just take it out of the way and judge him purely off his record, like you're saying, Scalisi, it's really not that bad. It's just that
considering the environment that he was in at the time,
Yeah, and Brick by Brick, I think, was one of his other big ones.
Yeah.
And I mean, and let's not forget, he did totally misuse Alvin Kamara, who is one of the NFL's best running backs, and instead, focused on I forget who the other guy was at the time.
Jalen Hurd.
Yeah, Jalen Hurd, right. So anyway, I mean, I agree. I think it's unfortunate for Butch is that the guy who hired him is already gone because he's now the UCF AD. So kind of one of the rare ADs who gets to make 2 coaching hires in one cycle. I mean, that's pretty incredible for that guy. But it's never a great situation when you get hired and your boss immediately leaves and somebody else comes in. But I do think he's set up well to succeed there. And I think if he gets a couple 8-9-win seasons, I do think he'll get another Power 5 job. I do.
Everything we just said about Butch is not super far off from what you could have said about Ed Orgeron a few years ago. He was a guy that I think a lot of people didn't take seriously, both from his on-field performance at Ole Miss and also because he was a kind of a clownish character. And, I mean, look, he just won a national championship a couple years ago. He got a major job. So I certainly wouldn't rule out Butch having another act left in his career as a Power 5 head coach.
I will say this. Arkansas State, I mean, we talked about UCF being one of the most attractive group of 5 jobs in the country. I think Arkansas State falls in that category also. It's a really attractive group of 5 job that consistently wins. And you cannot tell me that if Butch goes out and has 8, 9, 10 win seasons during the course of the next couple of years at Arkansas State, that especially when you now combine the rehabbing at Alabama part of it during the course of the last couple of years, that somebody at the Power 5 level and maybe even at the SEC level could be interested to give him another opportunity.
I think he would be the biggest possible success story for the Saban rehab clinic, just because of where he was when he came into it, where his reputation was. So it will be very interesting to see.
I'll throw one out to John, and I think I know the answer, despite the fact that one is definitely a bigger name at this point in terms of what they've accomplished recently as a head coach. But if you had to put money on it, who would you bet to get an SEC head coaching job first, Butch or Hugh Freeze?
I'll go Hugh Freeze still.
I wouldn't feel comfortable, or I would not feel confident making that bet.
We'll see. We will definitely be.
Who would you bet
between the two of them? Mm-hmm.
Factoring in all of the baggage.
Yeah, I know. I think based on what John said earlier, it's tough because Hugh needs more things to go right for him to get a job in the SEC than Butch does. I think there's more that's not in Hugh Freeze's control than could be said for Butch. So I don't know. Well, it's very interesting. We do know that the SEC does like to cycle through names over time. You usually get more than one act in the SEC as a coach. So we'll definitely
going forward. We can play a weekly game. Which retread gets back in the SEC first?
That's right.
We'll do 2 a week.
The coaching carousel has never been more aptly named than it is in the SEC, because if you watch long enough, you're just going to see the same guys going past you again.
The great scenario: Josh Heupel struggles during the course of the next few years at Tennessee. Butch kills it at Arkansas State, and trying to get back to an elite level brings Butch in to save things over in Knoxville.
The even better scenario, Zenitz, would be same thing, but Lane goes back to Tennessee, and then Hugh goes back to Ole Miss.
Yeah,
everybody just cycles back again.
I rule nothing out in this league anymore. All right, guys. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Enjoy the snow today. If you're in a place that's got it, stay safe. Don't drive. And fellas, we'll do this again next week.